Hello, I'm Elizabeth, and this is an electronic sewing demo for this year's Halloween STEAM Wearable Technology Workshop brought to you by the Design Thinking Initiative. The first step is to cut yourself a piece of conductive thread that's about as long as your arm. Then tie a double knot at one end of the thread. Try to make sure that the second knot ends up right on top of the first so that they combine into one thicker knot. Now we're going to thread our needle. Try rubbing the thread between your fingers and holding it very close to the end to make it easier to push the thread through the eye of the needle. Then bring about 4 inches of thread through the eye and hold on to that while you're sewing so that the thread doesn't slip through. We're going to make a really simple circuit with just a battery and an LED, which is a light. So our two electrical components are going to be this battery holder and this LED. Make sure to lay out your circuit and where your electronic components will go before you try to start sewing. We're going to need one piece of conductive thread that connects the positive side of the battery holder to the positive side of the LED, and a separate piece of conductive thread that connects the negative sides. Use a hot glue gun to attach the pieces to your fabric before you start sewing so that they don't move around. But make sure that for the smaller pieces, no hot glue gets in the holes where you're going to have to sew. We're going to start sewing by pushing our needle up through the fabric and through the positive end of the battery holder, and pull your thread all the way through until the knot hits the back of the fabric. Then make sure to trim the extra thread off of the knot so you won't get any short circuits. And then push the needle back down through the fabric so that the thread forms a little loop around that sew tab in the battery holder. Now we're going to do that same thing 3 more times, pushing the needle up through the sew tab and then back down through the fabric. You want at least 3 or 4 loops through every sew tab for every component that you're sewing, because that'll ensure you have a really strong connection in your circuit. Always make sure to pull your thread all the way through on every single stitch so that the conductive thread doesn't knot or get tangled or stick to itself. Now that we have 3 loops, we're going to start our running stitch, which is just a line of stitches from one component to the other. Here we're going from the positive end of the battery holder to the positive end of the LED. So push your needle back up through the sew tab, but then down through the fabric a bit further away. And then start stitching in a line, pushing the needle up and then down through the fabric all the way until you reach the positive end of the LED. My stitches are definitely not perfect or super even, but please know that you can still do this project even if you're not an expert hand sewer. Now that we've reached the LED, I'm going to push the needle back up through the sew tab and start looping just like we did with the battery holder sew tab. So I'm going to push it up through the sew tab and then down through the fabric on the other side until we have 3 or 4 loops. Now that we have 3 loops, we've got to tie a knot, but first flip the fabric over to make sure that your line of stitches doesn't have any tangles or knots in it. To tie the finishing knot, I'm going to push the needle up very close to the outside of the sew tab near where my loops are. Pull the thread all the way through, and then push the needle through the loops that you sewed before. Then the slightly tricky thing is you want to start pulling the thread through, but not all the way. Before it's pulled tight, you want to push the needle through that loop of thread that we've just created. And then when you pull that tight, you'll have a knot around your loops at the LED positive end. So that's a nice tight knot, but we want to do it at least one more time just to make sure that it's totally secure. I'm just going down through the sew tab again and then back up through the fabric very close to where I stitched before. And then again pushing the needle through those loops in the sew tab. And putting the needle through that loop in the thread. Now we're ready to trim off that excess. And the next step is to stitch another line from the negative end of the LED to the negative end of the battery holder. So here's my finished second line of stitching. Here's the back. We have 2 entirely separate lines, and now it's time to insert the battery. It has a plus symbol on one side, and that should be facing up, and then just push it right into the battery holder. And when you switch it on, your LED should light up. It's really, really pretty and very satisfying when it works. Try experimenting with how different kinds of fabric look over the light. It diffuses differently through like felt, and one of my favorites is tissue paper. You can make different shapes out of it, and then when you put the LED under it, it really diffuses through the entire shape and it glows and it looks super cool. You could make ears or horns or whatever you want. So be creative and send us pictures and videos of your wearable tech projects. Thank you so much for watching, and happy Halloween!